Nikita will be changing karma to make it so that high scav karma players will have a very steep penalty for killing other players. Think like a scav boss-sized penalty. This video is being sponsored by Surfshark VPN. If you guys wouldn't mind, I'm going to try and run this as an ad-free viewing experience, aside from obviously the promotion that I'm doing for them, in hopes that we'll be able to do more of these, because I would prefer to be able to do one of these every video instead of having to do mid-rolls every time. Newsy news. Hey everybody, my name is Onepeg, and this is the news for September 14th, 2021. In today's news episode, we're going to be covering all things podcast related. The one from Clean, the community podcast that featured Nikita with map updates, as well as Tarkov updates that have to do with changes to long-barreled weapons and spawn rates. But before we get into all that, the patch today. That was designed to fix the frame rate issues that people had been experiencing from NVIDIA Reflex. Hopefully that ends up fixing the problem for most everyone. Next up, we have some basic stat changes for all things long rifle related, specifically the M700, the DVL-10, the VPO-215, the T5000, and the Mosin. So the sawn-off Mosin barrel, instead of giving you -2 ergo, now only gives you -1. The velocity of the sawn-off barrel was also reduced ever so slightly, but the longer barrels all were buffed. None of these have been changed so drastically that it should really matter when you're aiming at somebody. Just kind of keep it in mind that you won't have to aim quite as high. Maybe a couple of pixels. Okay, switching gears onto the podcast with Nikita, Brandon Herrera, and Clean. And last but not least, boss rates. Killa's spawn rate was increased to 40%, and Rashala was increased to 36%, up from 33%. Okay, so now onto the podcast with Nikita, Brandon Herrera, and Clean, who was the host of the podcast. Now, this podcast was designed around talking about things outside of Tarkov, gun enthusiast kind of stuff, politics, policy. There were, however, a handful of questions that got asked about the game, but Nikita was pretty reserved in his responses because the majority of them were going to be answered in much more detail during the community podcast that happened a day later, which we'll get into in a minute. There was talk about the AK-50, which Brandon Herrera obviously is working on quite a bit. Nikita said that they would actually happily involve that gun or have that gun scanned into Tarkov, and it doesn't necessarily have to be a perfectly working form of the gun in order to be able to make it work or represent that it is working inside of Tarkov. They just need a good 3D scan of it. And he also talked about maybe with the strength of the kickback and that kind of stuff, maybe it would be something that could only be fired when you're like prone or something like that incredibly reliably. Later on in the podcast, there was talk about inertia. The operator's speed is too fast compared to how it would be in the real world. Walking, or the slowest form of movement, would actually end up being something akin to like a jogging pace, and at full strength, somebody that is sprinting about as fast as Usain Bolt for a longer duration of time if you have max endurance than what Usain Bolt could reliably hold or maintain that speed for, which kind of makes sense. There is an awful lot of mobility in Tarkov, so maybe that's something that they need to dial in. I don't know. Nikita said that it was something that they would look into, but obviously they want the game to be playable. There was then a question about whether Nikita and the rest of the dev team was still thinking about doing a post-raid review, like a death cam kind of thing. Nikita was a little bit reserved or hesitant about doing it inside of like the core Tarkov game, but what he did talk about was the possibility or likelihood of it being in arena mode so that people could review those plays later on. Then there was talk about unconscious states, unconscious players, and what they'll have access to. Nikita actually did say this, that secure containers, gamma containers, for instance, will never be lootable by anyone. Okay, now on to the community podcast, which happened a day later. Nikita said that there would be a lighthouse reveal coming very soon, that the 12.12 patch was a work in progress for the near future, which is going to have the lighthouse location, VoIP, inertia, and the introduction of NVIDIA DLSS. It is going to be tested on the ETS servers incredibly soon. Please go and sign up for the ETS servers. If you don't know how to do that, you can always go to the OEFT Discord and request to talk with an emissary, or possibly look in the OEFT Discord for a section on joining the ETS servers. On to black limbs and damage. He said that there was still a bug with blackened limbs that increased the time to kill on people sometimes, but it's going to be fixed later on, and it's really intermittent. You know what else does a lot of damage? Identity theft. Not a fun thing. It's a good thing that we have things like Surfshark VPN to be able to safeguard us, right? God, that transition was smooth. It almost goes without saying that all VPNs aren't created equally. A lot of them are difficult to use, even more are expensive, and more yet are incredibly slow. Well, in the case of Surfshark, they ended up blending all three of those things into a very user-friendly experience that is both inexpensive and incredibly fast. A VPN is simply designed to protect you and your identity as much as it possibly can from people that would like to steal that from you. Your IP address or your geolocation. As a streamer, unfortunately, one of the things that I have to worry about more and more as things become more successful is the likelihood that one day I could get swatted. And as a viewer, now that we've discovered that there's these certain user accounts that have extensions in them that sniff out IP addresses, the risk associated with even just watching Twitch now has gone up exponentially. I also have to try and protect myself as best I can through things like a VPN, which will help mask my identity that much more. It took me 4 mouse clicks to set up my account, and bam, my IP is masked. But there are also other benefits to it than just security that aren't commonly discussed. If I went to Netflix and wanted to watch It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia, I can't. However, it is available in the UK. By simply going to Surfshark, going down the server list, and clicking on the UK, in seconds, I now have an IP address located in the United Kingdom. I then go back to Netflix. It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia comes up right here. 14 seasons of it. Oh, and the best part? The license that you get from Surfshark, should you so decide, is an unlimited number of devices. Unlimited number. Myself, my wife, my kids, all of our iPads, phones, all of the PCs, everything. Unlimited number of uses. Hook up your whole family. They don't care. So do me a solid and click on the link in the description below, and you will get 83% off plus 3 months. It's like $2.20 a month or something. 83% off. So I want to say a special thank you to the folks over at Surfshark for sponsoring this video. I'd love to do more of these. I hope you enjoyed as much as I did. In terms of loot specifically, he said that there's an increase in good loot overall. He said, for example, the loot on labs is absolutely exactly the same in value and overall has been buffed. But the hotspots created predictable or reliable PvP interactions, and the idea is to make the gameplay more random and dynamic and not have these heat maps where everybody fights in the same place. Utilizing the same loot rush, loot areas, same routes, same repetition is not something that Nikita wants. This is a permanent loot change. In a couple of videos ago, I mentioned that the loot was an event. It is not an event. This is a step in a permanent change to how the loot system works in making it something that is a bit more dynamic. They'll add high loot areas, but they're not going to tell anyone about it, and those areas will change over time. So as they are discovered by players, the idea is that people will either share it with other people or they won't. They'll keep it to themselves because that's their treasure spot. That's their honeypot. That's where they want to go to get the good stuff. These natural organic changes to loot hotspots over time will likely not ever be shared by devs as they get changed. Someday, for instance, with an event, they could completely remove meds as an event. Or high loot value areas could be completely unlocked for an entire weekend. Like, let's say the red keycard room suddenly malfunctions, and now for an entire weekend, there's red keycard room loot available for everyone, and you don't need a key to open the door. He said that they're going to continue to throw curveballs like this at the community. So just to be clear, the way that the loot is intended to work is that there will not be specific places on a map where loot will continuously spawn of a certain type. Instead, those individual points that would have had that really good loot are basically now spread out over a certain area where that good loot will spawn nearby, where it had once at one time spawned in a very specific spot. Nikita said that the animation team is working really, really hard on new animations. It's more controllable blind fire, for instance, gestures, knockdowns, being knocked out, shoulder switching of your gun, and vaulting. Hey, maybe we'd even get ladder climbing. You never know. Nikita says that this should not increase resource load with all the new animations that are looking to be added. There's also additional malfunction animations, which we've already seen some of, like stovepiping, bolt locking and sticking, for example, where you see somebody struggling to get the bolt fixed. And then he even elaborated on being knocked out or being knocked unconscious, that this state could be caused by a contusion, getting hit in the head, shock, overdosing, and could be something that your character could by themselves recover from. He said that they also want to be able to expand this into squad play that's going to enable certain functions like body dragging or using meds on other teammates, using defibrillators, etc. And there's also a desire, at least on Nikita's part, to add some type of animation for the use of your gamma container that's going to have some type of time to it when you try to put something inside of it. Onto the Omnicron container. For those of you that are unaware, the Omnicron container is something that is in the game files but is not implemented in the game as of yet. Nikita said that the Omnicron container is going to be added at some point between the Epsilon container and the Kappa container for people that need to kind of grow into that. Now, they wanted to add it in 12.12, but he's not sure if it's going to make it or not. Insofar as obtaining something like the Omnicron container, we're not sure exactly where that's going to end up level-wise, and then obviously there's the XP gap in order to be able to get there, and then there were questions about whether or not there was enough XP to generate in order to be able to get to places like the Kappa container in a timely manner. And the argument from a lot of the guys on the panel was that there wasn't enough stuff to do instead of just running labs over and over again. So Nikita said, well, they thought that the quest reward system and how much XP was being awarded with what they already had in the game was adequate. However, there are going to be things like dailies getting added at some point in the relatively near future. So obviously, the daily system will have some XP reward tied to it, and that's going to end up speeding up the grind a bit. There was also one other question about whether or not scav quests would be added in the game for karma-related stuff. And he said scav quests for boosting or costing karma won't be in the game at this point, and that the idea would be to save it for some type of scav DLC. And then obviously there's the thing that we all had seen on Twitter already. Geeksay brought up something having to do with GPUs specifically being found in computers and how they're never found in computers anymore. The rate of that was like something like 0.5% or something. Nikita said that it was still on the loot table, but it was incredibly rare, so he more than doubled it to 1.3%. You should see GPUs in computers a little bit more often. I guess it'd be like 1 in every 80. He then confirmed that the Streets of Tarkov trailer that we all know and love very much was a video for the first area to be released in Streets, and that it is quite expansive. Again, talking about how Streets of Tarkov would be like its own standalone game if all of Streets that they wanted to make is in the game. And then on to Lighthouse. The production of Lighthouse, Nikita said he's happy where it is right now. There will not be any bosses on Lighthouse upon release of Lighthouse. There's going to be a few small closed-off areas, but there will be an in-person NPC to trade with as the first major test of this new in-raid trading system. Be on the lookout at some point after Lighthouse is released to have an NPC trader physically on the map for you to be able to go and talk to and trade with. Lighthouse is going to be approximately half the size of Shoreline, so not very big like old pre-expansion woods. There will be 10 to 12 players max and will be a long beach corridor style type of map like how Customs used to be. Nikita will be changing karma to make it so that high scav karma players will have a very steep penalty for killing other players. Think like a scav boss-sized penalty. Nikita then confirmed that high-tier, high-value ammo is progressively being removed from traders to cut off the idea of meta gameplay. And then on to VoIP. So, VoIP is not going to just be enclosed radio-style VoIP. Proximity VoIP is going to be enabled. There will be the availability of muting other people, and there's also going to be reporting functions for people that do things that they should not be doing. Now, originally, when I had reported this, I talked about the idea of, like, you know, yelling racial epithets or homophobic slurs or something like that through the audio in-game through VoIP. But it's actually a little bit more restrictive than that. Basically, he said, behave, or you might get banned, or if it's bad enough, Nikita will remove the VoIP system. They're trying to design a system that is going to stop people from abusing VoIP. And this is almost a direct quote. People abusing it will be reported and reviewed in real time and possibly punished in real time. And the example that he used was people that are blasting music over VoIP. So I would say if the idea is to be a meme lord and you don't want to lose your account, you may not want to do that. He doesn't want people doing funny stuff inside of the VoIP system. So unless it's going to be your own lips yelling at people as you move around, I would say not to be using stuff like voice mod. It sucks, but he's going to hit you. Now, there's going to be plenty of people that aren't going to see this video. More players in the community will not see this video than ones that will. So I'm going to tell you guys in hopes that you are going to tell others. This is out of the mouth of the man. He's also adding additional voice phrases for scavs, similar to PMCs with their own hotkeys. Main takeaways from this that I think ended up being kind of like a big thing was the loot dynamism and what they're going for, which I think is great. It does force players to move around more. Yeah, sure, there might be less PvP interaction, but I like the idea of having it much more randomized instead of going like, oh, I can't go over there because there's likely going to be 5 PMCs like crowded around this one spot. I like the idea of more dynamic loot. If you guys want a hint, there's a for the OGs that stuck around to the end of the video. Look underneath the escalators in interchange. Broken boxes on interchange, and broken boxes on woods. Lead X's. Okay, lead X's. You're welcome. This is going to be the most restrictive use or rules around an in-game VoIP system I think I've ever seen. I don't know of any other game that has proximity-related VoIP that would punish people for the use of, like, audio cues, audio triggers over the VoIP system using stuff like voice mod. I've never seen that before, so enforcing that is going to be a little bit polarizing for the community, I can see already. But, you know, what can you do? It's his game, and we can adapt to it or quit. And I think the majority of people that wanted VoIP in the game want VoIP in the game for the right reasons. So we'll just have to play along with it and see what he does. All right, guys, that's all I have for this video. Thank you so much. Please check out the link in the description for the guys over at Surfshark. I would very much appreciate that. Hopefully you guys enjoyed the sponsor. I'm trying to get more of these. We'll see you in the next one. Please consider subbing the channel if you don't already. And yeah, see ya. Peace.